Okay, our next session is A2, which is all about Cal Grant institutional eligibility. So the topics we'll cover during this session include the types of qualifying colleges and universities that can administer Cal Grant, participation requirements. We'll look at the Cal Grant Institutional Participation Agreement, or the IPA, changes to school status, and then policies and procedures. So there are three types of qualifying colleges and universities that can administer Cal Grant. So first we have the California public system, including the California community colleges, the California State University or CSU system, and then the University of California system or the UCs. We also have nonprofit institutions that are headquartered and operating in California. And then we also have California private or independent schools. So we'll take a look more at these requirements in the next few slides. So in order to administer Cal Grant, the schools must also participate in the federal Pell Grant program and at least two other federal student aid programs. So that can include federal work study, the direct loan program, or FSEOG. So a few examples of the private institutions within California that can administer Cal Grant are listed here, and they are participating in Pell Grant and at least two other federal aid programs. So other participation requirements include a 3-year cohort default rate of less than 15.5%. The cohort default rate is essentially the ratio of students who enter repayment on their student loans and those who later default on their loans. So we'll take a closer look at this on the next slide. Now, schools must also maintain a graduation rate greater than 30%. And so these requirements apply to all schools administering Cal Grant, not just private, not just for-profit or nonprofit. This applies to all schools across the board. They must have this 3-year CDR of less than 15.5%, and then that graduation rate must be greater than 30%. And we'll also look closer at graduation rate in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at cohort default rate. So if you weren't familiar with this term, essentially what this is measuring the ratio of students who enter repayment on their student loan during a particular cohort year. And then it measures how many of those students have defaulted on their loans, and then that is the percentage of their cohort default rate. So let's take a look at an example. So we're looking at fiscal years 2018, 2019, and 2020. Over the course of this 3-year period, this particular example school had 625 student loan borrowers who entered repayment during the cohort fiscal years who later defaulted on their student loans. Now, this is divided by the total number of borrowers who entered repayment during these years. That formula comes to a total of 12.5% cohort default rate. So again, as long as their rate is under 15.5%, the school can continue administering Cal Grant. The other requirement is graduation rate. So the graduation rate is looking at the percentage of full-time, first-time degree-seeking students who graduate in 150% or less of the expected time to complete their degree requirements. So first, they consider the entering year. So which year did the student enter their program? Then it looks at full-time, first-time degree seekers, and then the year of graduation. So when we say 150% of the expected time to complete degree requirements, we mean for a 2-year program that they must graduate within 3 years, or 150% of that time frame. And for students in a 4-year degree program, they must be graduating within 6 years, or again, 150% of that time frame. So as long as the school has a graduation rate greater than 30% for their students, then they also meet this requirement in order to administer Cal Grant. Now, all schools must submit a Cal Grant Institutional Participation Agreement, or an IPA. This is for schools who are brand new to Cal Grant or for schools who want to continue administering Cal Grant. Now, the IPA, it's a binding contract between the school and the commission. It's going to be used, again, for initial participation and renewals or updates. And we'll talk more about the times when an update is needed on the next slide. Eligible institutions with a valid Cal Grant IPA are going to be placed on our CSAC eligible schools list that we've talked about in the previous session. Now, each IPA is for a 4-year period. So the current IPA that we're in is for the 2023 through 27 period. For all renewal schools, they were submitted by May 31st of 2023. But as new schools begin to participate in the Cal Grant program, they may be just now submitting their IPA. But again, it is for the period of 2023 through 2027. And this particular IPA, this is going to end on June 30th of 2027. Now, if you have questions about your IPA or any of the required documents, we actually have an IPA team that can assist you. So you'll want to submit your questions through email to csacipa@csac.ca.gov. Many of the requirements that we're talking about in this session are all listed in detail within the IPA. So even if you're not the administrator who is responsible for submitting or renewing the IPA, I do recommend that you read it. It has a lot of great information in there about things like the required graduation rate or the CDR or other related requirements regarding your institutional policies and procedures. So it's just something good to at least review as someone who is administering the Cal Grant. Even if you are not perhaps the financial aid director, it is worth at least a look over just to get an idea of what is truly required of the schools to administer Cal Grant. Now, I mentioned that there are times when schools would need to submit an updated IPA, and that can be related to changes in school status. And so if an institution has any of these following changes, they must notify the commission within 10 days. And there are times when there are additional steps needed to renew that Cal Grant IPA and stay within the required guidelines in order to administer Cal Grant. And so some of these changes that could occur will require a notification to the commission. So that can include things like a shift in control or a change in school ownership, specifically for those private schools or their for-profit or nonprofit schools. If the school is permanently closed, if there is an addition or loss of school locations in California, if they are no longer participating in federal programs or the 90-10 rule. Now, if you're not familiar with the 90-10 rule, this is a rule that refers to the U.S. regulation that governs for-profit higher education. It caps the percentage of revenue that a proprietary school can receive from federal financial aid sources at 90%. The other 10% of their revenue must come from alternative sources. In order to participate in Cal Grant as a for-profit school, they must be meeting that 90-10 rule, or of course be participating in at least 3 federal aid programs. Now, also, if a school loses accreditation, or if there are major changes in personnel, such as the president, the CEO, or the chancellor, you'll definitely want to contact the commission and find out if an IPA update is needed. Now, institutions are required to not only create but maintain their own policies and procedures with regard to processing Cal Grant funds. This is something that is looked at during a Cal Grant audit, and so it's important that you have these policies and procedures documented and available. So some of these policies may include payment and disbursement policies or dates, your refund policy, how you reconcile the Cal Grant program, your specific education level policy, and then, of course, your satisfactory academic progress or SAP policy. So again, just make sure these are well documented, they are available, especially in the case of a Cal Grant audit. I recommend that if you haven't already, sign up for our listserv, because we oftentimes are going to be releasing information about important deadlines and updates that you may need to make to your own policies and procedures whenever we make major changes to our program. So again, make sure you've signed up for the listserv so you can get our grant operations memos and our grant special alerts. Now, this is also specified in the Cal Grant IPA. It is part of California Education Code, and this is all about reporting for California license exam data. So schools that offer programs leading to employment for which a passage of a state license exam is required, these schools must provide an access point for prospective and current students to view the passage rates of the state license exams, if it's available. Passage rates must be for the most recent available year, and these rates must include graduates of undergrad programs. And so, this requirement is actually for all schools. I do want to make sure I emphasize this, that all schools must submit this particular certification to the commission in order to remain within compliance, even if they have no qualifying programs. So an example of a program that leads to a state license exam is a teaching credential program that requires the passage of an exam in order to get credentialed. But again, if schools have no programs that lead to an exam, they still need to fill out the certification. It's housed within our web grant system, and it's a one-page document where you'll go through, you'll indicate the academic year, the name of your institution, and then you'll let us know which programs you have that require the passage of a licensing exam within California. And so as you can see here on the slide, some of those programs may include nursing, dental assistant, barbering, or cosmetology, teaching credential. But if you are a school that does not offer any of these programs, you'll simply click this box here and you'll submit. So really all schools must be submitting this certification just to at least let us know which programs you do have, or if you do not have any programs that lead to an exam. The 24-25 certification was due on August 31st, 2024, so it's likely that the 25-26 will be due in August of 2025. Just one more time to emphasize that all schools must submit the certification to remain within compliance, even if they have no qualifying programs. And then also within California Ed Code is data reporting through Senate Bill 70. So this is the requirement that institutions must submit data related to their enrollment, persistence, and graduation rates of all their undergraduate students. Data should include job placement rates and wage information for each program that is either designated or advertised to lead to a particular type of job or promoted with a claim regarding job placement. The deadline for SB 70 reporting is December 31st for the prior academic year, and we have an entire guide available on our website, which will cover all of the necessary requirements for SB data reporting. And just a note for UCs, CSUs, and community colleges, your SB 70 data reporting is provided by your respective chancellor's offices. So really, it's all other institutions that are operating independently will likely need to take this step on their own. So again, if you have questions, definitely let us know, or check out the SB 70 data reporting overview guide available on our website. And then another education code to look at, something that is required for all Cal Grant administering institutions, is Education Code 67386. And this requires that schools adopt a policy concerning sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. CSAC has provided all institutions and their governing boards with a certification that must be completed specifically for this education code requirement. And this also must be provided during the Cal Grant IPA renewal. So again, this is all outlined in your IPA. There's more information there. And then, of course, you can also refer to Education Code 67386 for more information. Now, the majority of institutions have a bank account where their Cal Grant funds are initially deposited. Part of your IPA and your agreement to administer Cal Grant is that you must do interest remittance. That means that your Cal Grant funds must be held in an interest-bearing account, an investment account, or the equivalent. The financial institution that holds those funds must be located in California, and their accounts must be insured by the FDIC. Now, any interest accrued on undispersed Cal Grant funds must be returned to the Commission. So schools should utilize that same methodology used by the financial institution to calculate the interest that will accrue. Bank fees and negative interest cannot be deducted from the interest, so just keep that in mind. Interest remittance is due March 1st from the prior calendar year. So for example, for the year of 2023, that year began January 1st and ended December 31st of 2023. That interest remittance was due on March 1st of 2024. So if you want more information, there's a few places that you can get more information specifically about this policy. We have a Grant Special Alert 2024-05 that is linked down at the bottom of the slide. You can also refer to the Cal Grant Handbook, where there should be a section in there on this particular topic, and then of course refer to your IPA as well. And then remember, if you have questions, we have answers. So as we are in this webinar today, I have many of my colleagues on the line ready to answer any of your questions. Just make sure you type them into the Q&A box instead of the chat box. We're here standing by. You can get answers to your questions here in real time. And just a reminder that a PDF of this webinar was emailed to all attendees yesterday, so make sure you check your spam or your junk box. And if you still haven't received it, you can email us at training@csac.ca.gov to request a copy.